Welcome to Seeking the Lost with Earl Barnett. This program is sponsored by some area churches of Christ and is dedicated to spreading the everlasting gospel as revealed in the Holy Scriptures. The churches of Christ accept the Scriptures as totally inspired of God and the all-sufficient guide for faith and practice. Therefore, they reject all doctrines of men and rely totally on the Bible to direct their course in serving God. It is our pledge to you that each lesson will be the truth as revealed in His holy word. Mr. Barnett carefully prepares the graphics so you can clearly see the book, chapter, and verse of each lesson taught. We urge you to either copy the scriptures used or record this program for further study. If you have any questions or comments, or if you need prayer, the Seeking the Lost ministry can be reached toll-free at 1-800-390-7734. It is our prayer that Seeking the Lost will be an important source of information about God's Word and will help you more perfectly worship Him. And now, here is Mr. Barnett.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in to the Seeking the Lost broadcast. Today I want to study with you a very simple subject and has to do with the profiles of two young unknown heroes. Have you ever thought about that the things that you do in the service of the Lord is somewhat insignificant and minuscule, and you think that you're reading the Bible of people doing great things, but you don't have that opportunity that you get to do some of the little things, but you wonder how that they really add up. Remember this, that all Bible readers know the names of the main characters found in the Scriptures, men and women such as Adam and Eve, Moses, Abraham, Jacob, Joseph, David, Esther and Sarah, Daniel, all the prophets, and in the New Testament, the apostles. These seems to be household names to the worshipers of God. Anybody that's read the Bible understand and read about these characters. So what about those people that are somewhat insignificant? Well, this is a study of a young man and a young girl, each making a simple decision. Yet if their stories were removed from the Scriptures, we would lose important lessons on courage and faith. These two young people teach us that choices made in seconds in our lives may be the key to open the door to great adventures in faith. Let's talk about that a little while. Here, first one that I want to talk to you about is Jonathan's armor bearer. Now, an armor bearer's job was that, to bear the armor of his champion. He carried the shield and maybe other ordinances that he might have on him. Maybe carry part of his equipment such as a sword or, a dagger, things of that sort, his body armor. And when he was in mortal combat, of course, would be to stand and to back him up. And so that was the duty of an armor bearer. Secondary in nature, right? Very few people that I can think of were ever named when they served as an armor bearer. But look at 1 Samuel 13. Then the Philistines gathered together to fight with Israel. Listen to this, 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen, and people as the sand which is on the seashore in multitude. And they came up and encamped in Michmash to the east of Bethaven. Here we have that the people of God had started this, had provocations. They had attacked certain parts of the Philistines. The Philistines ruled over them. And they wanted the people wanted to be free, of course, from the Philistines. But now they've got all of these people, this huge army coming at them. And when the men of Israel saw that they were in danger, for the people were distressed, then the people, they began to hide in caves, in thickets, and rocks, and holes, and pits. And even some of the Hebrews crossed over the Jordan to the land of Gad and of Gilead. As for Saul, he was still in Gilgal, and all the people followed him trembling. They knew that this mighty army of the Philistines was coming down upon them. And they were afraid, and they had every right to be, because there was no blacksmith to be found throughout all the land of Israel. For the Philistines said, lest the Hebrews make swords and spears. There was no blacksmith. if they needed a tool sharpened, they had to go to the Philistine blacksmith, and they, for a price, would sharpen their tools. But they had no blacksmith of their own because they were afraid that the people would arm themselves. You know, this is a bad situation that they're facing, all of this army. And so it came about on the day of battle, there was neither sword nor spear found in the hand of any of the people who were with Saul and Jonathan. But they were found with Saul and Jonathan, his son. They had a sword. The rest of the people are unarmed. That is true. It is no wonder that they began to queer and to fake that here this mighty army is marching against us. We don't even have a sword. Only Jonathan and Saul are armed in any way. Jonathan's bold attack, when Jonathan said to the young man who bore his armor, which is the subject of our story, "Come and let us go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us. For nothing restrains the Lord from saving by many or by few." And here's where I got the idea. And so his armor bearer said to him, did he say, "Hey, you can't go over there. You're the only one that's armed. I don't even have a sword. I have nothing. You better not go. Let's think this over. Do all that is in your heart. Go then. Here am I with you according to your heart. Everything that you desire, I'm right behind you." Who was this fella? We don't know. He was an armor bearer, but he is never mentioned by name in the scriptures. And yet, there he is standing behind Jonathan in this bold attack. We don't know his name, but we know something about him. And then Jonathan said, "Well, okay, let's cross over to these men, and we will show ourselves to them. If they say thus to us, 'Wait until we come to you,' then we will stand still in our place and not go up. But if they say, 'Come up to us,' then we'll go up, for the Lord has delivered them into our hand, and this will be a sign to us." Think about this. And then the men of the garrison called to Jonathan and his armor bearer and said, "Come up to us, and we will show you something." And Jonathan said to his armor bearer, "Come up with me, for the Lord has delivered them into the hand of Israel." Jonathan's faith, of course, is very prominent here, and it is commendable. But that little armor bearer is going with him. He doesn't even have a sword. And he's carrying whatever armor that Jonathan has, but he doesn't have any. And Jonathan climbed up on his hands and knees with his armor bearer after them, and they fell before Jonathan. And he came after him. His armor bearer killed him. That first slaughter which Jonathan and his armor bearer made was about 20 men within about a half an acre of land. Think about that. They got up there. Now they're going against seasoned soldiers, battle-hardened Philistines. And they're going against them with just one sword. Evidently the little armor bearer, that after Jonathan began the fight, he would be able to pick up a weapon so that he could come after him and finish him off. But just think about that. The attack resulted in the complete rout of the Philistines. Then Saul and all the people who were with him assembled, and they went to battle. Indeed, every man's sword was against his neighbor, and there was very great confusion. They started fighting each other. So the Lord saved Israel that day, and the battle shifted to Bethaven. The Lord saved Israel that day. Here are two young men. One of them is the crown prince, son of Saul. The other, an unknown person, an armor bearer, and yet he was willing to risk his life too. Who was this young man? Remember that he is unarmed. Only Jonathan had a sword, yet he is going to aid in an attack on a Philistine garrison of 20 men, 20 soldiers. The armor bearer is unknown except to God. Neither Samuel, consider this, neither Samuel the prophet, nor Saul the king was aware of the pending attack. They didn't know what was going on. Jonathan and his armor bearers out there on their own. And yet, they were depending on God to help them, but it hinged on a sign that Jonathan himself had made up. If they say, wait till we get there, we won't go. If they say, come up to us, the Lord has delivered them into our hand. And the young armor bearer was right behind him with all of his heart. You think about that, it's so amazing. This is his statement. Here I am with you according to your heart. Whatever you want to do. Even though we do not know his name, he is not anonymous to God, is he? God remembers who this young person is, because the scriptures teach us, for God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil, and that applies to us today. So we don't know his name, but you can believe that God Almighty does. Here is one of the interesting things about the scripture. It's always correct. It's always correct topographically speaking, and it's always correct in facts, known facts. Almost 3,000 years later, during World War I, British forces were under the command of General Allenby were to face the Turks at the same location. One night, Major Vivian Gilbert of the British Army was planning the battle against the Ottoman troops. He remembered there was a town by the name of Michmash written somewhere in the Bible. He searched until he found it. He found the verse and discovered that there was a secret pass around the town, and incredibly, using the Bible's landmarks, you remember, if you read the Bible, the story closely, there were two rocks that would identify this passageway, that he found the same secret path, and the British forces used this path to outmaneuver the Ottomans, and the British took the town. And therefore it seems that Jonathan's strategy long ago ultimately helped decide the Battle of Michmash in two completely different ages, placing Jonathan back a time of David about 1000 BC. And then, of course, this was in the 20th century. And you can see that as hundreds of years passed, and because a person was a Bible scholar, he remembered Michmash. And in that same setting, he found that secret passageway up to that half acre of land and gained the advantage so many hundreds of years later. The Bible is amazing, isn't it? Then again, here's another one, the little captive girl. You know, we sometimes dwell upon the great heroes of the Bible, and we think, well, you know, this is worthy of our study. But this is worthy of our study too. The captive little girl. Can she make a difference? In the whole scheme of things, can she make a difference? Well, she did. You see, Naaman was a commander of the army of Syria. And he was a great and honorable man in the eyes of his master. And I want you to notice this statement right here. Because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. You know, sometimes we think that the Lord paid attention only to his chosen, the Jewish people. But the Lord was involved then with other people too. And in the case of Syria, that God saw it right, the right thing to do, that is, to help the Syrians win under the leadership of Naaman. The scriptures say that he was a mighty man of valor, but a leper. That just ruined everything, didn't it? Here is the most successful general that the Syrians have. And the king of Syria thinks so much of him. He's an honorable man. He is a great general, a military genius, because the Lord was helping him. But here's something. And the Syrians had gone out on raids, didn't say that Naaman led the raid, and had brought back captive a young girl from the land of Israel. And she waited on Naaman's wife. Young people, how would you like to be grabbed up out of your country, taken away from your home, and carried away to a foreign country and made a slave? You know, that's still happening. It's still happening among the terrorist groups that are in the world today. It's still happening. But it happened here to this young girl too. What is her contribution to the big picture, the story? Why would she be an unsung hero, a heroine? Well, it's very simple. Then she said to her mistress, if only my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria, he would heal him of his leprosy. Naaman went in and told his master, saying, thus and thus said the girl who is from the land of Israel. Now that king didn't hesitate because he thinks a lot. He thinks a lot of Naaman. But he was a leper. That was the only thing that really kept him from having the good life, so to speak. He was a leper. And of course you know that this is the rotting of the skin. In severe cases, the skin just actually falls from the bones. It was an incurable disease. If there's any chance that there's someone in Israel that can make my favorite general, make him whole again, I'll pay any price. And here's the point. The little girl said, with the prophet, the first thing he did was to send Naaman to the king of Israel. And so the king of Syria said, go now and I'll send a letter to the king of Israel. I'll send him a letter over there. So he departed and took with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, 10 changes of clothing. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, which said, now be advised when this letter comes to you, that I have sent Naaman my servant to you, that you may heal him of his leprosy. Well, the king, he was stunned just to think about that the king of Syria has sent his favorite and most renowned general to me to heal him of his leprosy. You see, the little girl said, with the prophet, but they went to the wrong man. And so the king of Israel rightly assumed, I suppose, that he read the letter. He tore his clothes and said, am I God to kill and to make alive? This man sends a man to me to heal him of his leprosy. Listen, and see how he seeks to quarrel with me. In other words, he wants war. And so it was when Elisha, this man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes. They do that, you know, in cases of desperation or disgust. That he sent to the king, saying, why have you torn your clothes off of you? Please let him come to me, and he shall know there is a prophet in Israel. Where did this all get started? Caused an international incident. Where did it all get started? Well, it got started with a little girl who was anonymous. We don't know her name. But she said if he was with the prophet in Israel, he could be healed. Now look, when Naaman went with his horses in the chariot and he stood at the door of Elisha's house, Elisha sent a message to him saying, go and wash in the Jordan 7 times and your flesh shall be restored to you and you shall be clean. The messenger came out, you know. He didn't even come out of the house to meet this great man. Sent a messenger out there to tell him, boy, that didn't go well with Naaman, because Naaman was furious and went away and said, indeed, I said to myself, well, he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the place, and heal the leprosy. He'd made up his mind how the ceremony was going to go. It's going to be somewhat elaborate. It's going to be something to see. And he said, and now, it wants me to go wash in Jordan? Why, Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel. Could not I wash them and be clean? So he turned away in a rage. It's a wonder he hadn't attacked the house. But sometimes, and this would be a person that we could talk about who is anonymous, and yet he had great impact. And his servants came to him and said, well, my father, the prophet, had told you to do something great. Would you have not done it? How much more then when he says to you, wash and be clean? So he went down and dipped 7 times in the Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. Just think about that. He did exactly what the prophet had told him to do, and it worked. Now then, one of the greatest stories found in the scriptures of the power of God was started by the faith of a young girl. The story of Naaman. Wow, sometimes we don't even think about the young girl, but she had a part in it, didn't she? She had been snatched away from her home and her parents and had been made a slave to Naaman's wife. What does she owe that bunch? Just think about her situation. By her testimony, though, not only was Naaman cured, but he was converted to worship the true God. What an impact this little girl had. But what if she had been so bitter, she was glad to see Naaman's flesh rotting from his bones? I've been snatched away from my parents, from my home, and I'm a slave here. He's getting what he deserved. I'm glad to see the leprosy eating away. She didn't do that. What if her faith had been destroyed because she was kidnapped from her home and enslaved? Why did God let this happen to me? Sometimes people say, well, I'm mad at God. Well, you better reconsider that position, but a lot of people do. They are so irrational that my prayers were never answered. I prayed for this person to get well, and he didn't get well. And this fellow over here got well. He didn't deserve to get well. Well, that'd be in your judgment, but I'm just mad at God. Well, about prayer, you have to remember this, that God answers prayers for our benefits. One thing to remember is that God does not answer every prayer. He didn't answer every prayer of Jesus Christ. Jesus prayed, Father, if it be thy will, let this cup pass from me. Yet, not as I will, but as you will. He didn't answer that prayer to let the cup pass from him. What if her faith had been destroyed in God? God didn't treat me right. Only God knows her name. But because of her, hundreds of thousands of lessons have been taught on the story of Naaman. This is not my first time to talk about Naaman, but it's one of the first times to talk about that little girl, that little anonymous girl, what she caused to happen. Think about it. Without this young girl, we would have missed so many great lessons. Here's one or two. We would have missed the lesson that God sometimes will ask us to do something completely illogical. What was that? Go dip 7 times in the river Jordan. Well, what's that got to do with it? Same thing as this. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved, but he that believeth not shall be damned. Many people don't believe that. How could you write anything any more plainly? Somebody said, I don't see any connection with being dipped in water and having remission of sins. Well, logically speaking, you're not washing sins off literally, but there's a connection. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. That's it. Many people like Naaman, they don't see it. And then again, we would not have a perfect example of human reaction to the simplicity of the gospel. Many people think that, in order for me to be saved, there's got to be a huge ceremony. There's got to be a lot of pomp and glory. And yet, the simplicity of the gospel, we find, a person, like the eunuch, that he was baptized while riding in a chariot and being taught, and he was baptized because he said, well, here's water. What's keeping me from being baptized? Wasn't a huge crowd around. Wasn't any pomp and glory and all of that stuff. It was simple. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. But many people can't accept that. We would not have a perfect example of human reaction to the simplicity of the gospel. Naaman was wroth and went away. Behold, I thought. And that's what gets a lot of people in trouble, about the simplicity of the gospel. Behold, I thought that there's more to it than hearing and believing and confessing the name of Christ and being buried with him in baptism to arise and walk in newness of life. Behold, I thought. In other words, I thought there was something different. The scriptures are plain. The simple plan of salvation. The simplicity of the gospel throws many people awry. Why? Because they think that there ought to be something else. And yet the scriptures are plainly taught. And think about this. God can use the least of us for his glory and power. The least of us. Now there is that little girl. Insignificant. We don't even know her name. She was stolen and made a slave. But God used her. Just think about that. The Apostle Paul was a very important man in the New Testament, wasn't he? But in his own eyes, to me, who am less than the least of all the saints. Paul, why do you have such a small idea about yourself? Well, he persecuted the church. But he said, who am less than least of all the saints, this grace was given, that I should preach among the Gentiles the unsearchable riches of Christ. I'm the least of all the saints. And yet God used him. Think about that. Another thing, think about this. We would have missed the lesson of the total impact of a single act or word. Just a single act. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. That great lesson we would have missed. And here is one that we can all remember. And it relates to this very passage that we're talking about, the little girl. Remember now your Creator in the days of your youth. Perhaps there are many people in our television audience today. You remember your Creator. It may not be the trend. It may not lead you in the paths of popularity. But remember your Creator in the days of your youth. He says, because before the difficult days come, you get old. And the years draw near when you say, I have no pleasure in them. There are many people this morning that are literally wanting to die because they're in such misery and pain. And God can use anybody, but he can use those that are young much better. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth. And like these two young people that we have discussed, make an impact. Make an impact on the world today. Thank you for watching. This is Earl Barnett saying you have a good day.
Our God is an awesome God.
You have been watching Seeking the Lost with Earl Barnett.